And they put the people on such a guilt trip that make them believe if you don't give an X amount of money.
Society. Yet from the beginning, Jennings positioned himself differently, insisting that scripture should shape culture rather than be reshaped by it. His preaching style, direct and uncompromising, has drawn admiration from those seeking clarity and consistency, while also provoking discomfort among those who prefer flexibility and reinterpretation. Over time, this tension has become central to how he is understood, not as a figure trying to appeal broadly, but as one determined to remain anchored in what he believes is biblical truth, regardless of the personal or public cost. Foundations shaped by faith and order. Gino Jennings' worldview was formed long before he ever stepped behind a pulpit, rooted in a household where faith was not abstract, but lived daily with structure and seriousness. Raised in an environment that emphasized scripture, discipline, and moral responsibility, he learned early that belief carried expectations. Faith in his home was not emotional or casual. It was practiced through consistency, restraint, and accountability. Church life was central, shaping routines, values, and relationships. And from a young age, he absorbed the idea that one's actions must align with one's convictions. This upbringing cultivated in him a respect for order and clarity, instilling a mindset that valued obedience to principle over personal comfort or public approval. And these early lessons would later become central to the way he approached leadership and teaching. A father's quiet but lasting influence. At the heart of Jennings' early formation was the example set by his father, Bishop Ernest Jennings, whose influence extended beyond words into everyday conduct. Watching his father lead a congregation exposed him to the realities of ministry not as performance, but as responsibility. He observed the demands placed on a spiritual leader, the discipline required to maintain credibility, and the personal sacrifices that came with guiding others. What stood out most was not authority, but consistency, the idea that leadership in faith begins with personal integrity. This example shaped Gino's understanding of spiritual authority as something earned through obedience and accountability, rather than granted by title or popularity, laying a foundation that would inform his own approach to ministry. Learning to speak with substance, Jennings' early preaching experiences took place within the familiar walls of his father's church, an environment that offered both support and scrutiny. Speaking to people who knew him personally required sincerity rather than performance, forcing him to develop depth and clarity in his teaching. These early opportunities allowed him to immerse himself in Scripture, refining his ability to explain complex passages with confidence and precision. Rather than relying on emotional delivery, he focused on interpretation and conviction, developing a style that emphasized structure and directness. Over time, his confidence grew not from applause but from a deepening sense of personal belief, reinforcing his identity as a teacher, grounded in study rather than spectacle. Taking an unlikely step forward. In 1984, at just 21 years old, Jennings made the bold decision to establish his own congregation, a move that reflected both conviction and resolve. The beginnings were modest, with early gatherings held in the living room of his family's Philadelphia home, shaped more by necessity than ambition. Starting a church at such a young age required a willingness to shoulder responsibility without guarantees, and those early meetings were marked by intimacy and focus. Scripture took center stage, and the emphasis was placed on discipline, clarity, and personal conduct. What drew people was not entertainment or innovation, but a sense of certainty, a feeling that the teachings offered clear boundaries in a world that often felt increasingly uncertain. Building a message around clarity. As the congregation slowly grew, it began attracting individuals searching for stability and structure in their spiritual lives. Jennings' teachings appealed to those who felt unsettled by shifting interpretations and evolving norms within broader religious spaces. His approach emphasized consistency, personal accountability, and a literal engagement with Scripture, offering a framework that felt firm and dependable. For many early followers, the appeal was not about rejecting others, but about finding a place where beliefs were clearly defined. In a time of cultural and religious transition, this clarity provided a sense of grounding, reinforcing the idea that faith could still offer firm guidance amid change. Growth without spectacle. Jennings' ministry expanded gradually, not through large-scale promotion, but through word of mouth and shared conviction. Rather than focusing on visibility, he prioritized teaching, establishing additional congregations that followed the same doctrinal foundation. Each church operated independently, yet remained united by shared beliefs and consistent instruction. This slow, deliberate growth reinforced the movement's identity as one rooted in theology rather than branding. The absence of spectacle became part of its character, appealing to those who valued substance over presentation. Expansion was seen not as a goal in itself, but as a natural result of shared belief and commitment. Teaching as the center of leadership central to Jennings's leadership style has always been teaching, with sermons serving as the primary vehicle for influence. His delivery is structured, deliberate, and focused on interpretation, reflecting his belief that understanding Scripture requires discipline and effort. He does not shy away from challenging passages, choosing instead to address them directly and systematically. This approach has earned both admiration and criticism, but it reflects a consistent philosophy that faith should be approached with seriousness rather than convenience. For his followers, this commitment reinforces trust, creating a sense that teachings are rooted in study rather than trend. Conviction over popularity. Throughout his public life, Jennings has remained largely uninterested in adapting his message to gain wider acceptance. His emphasis on conviction over popularity has shaped both his support and his criticism, positioning him as a figure who prioritizes principle over approval. This stance has limited mainstream appeal but strengthened loyalty among those who resonate with his approach. By maintaining a consistent message, he has reinforced his identity as a leader guided by belief rather than audience response. For supporters, this consistency signals integrity, even when it invites disagreement. Navigating visibility and responsibility. As Jennings's platform expanded through recorded sermons and digital distribution, his influence reached far beyond local congregations. With increased visibility came greater responsibility, as his words began shaping conversations well outside his immediate community. Rather than altering his approach, he continued emphasizing study, discipline, and accountability, viewing broader reach as an extension of responsibility rather than an opportunity for reinvention. This consistency has helped preserve the identity of his ministry, even as it operates on a larger scale, reinforcing the idea that growth does not require dilution of purpose. Understanding his appeal. The enduring appeal of Jennings's ministry lies not in charisma or innovation, but in certainty and structure. For individuals seeking firm guidance and clearly defined beliefs, his teachings offer a sense of order and direction. In a world where many feel overwhelmed by complexity and contradiction, this approach provides simplicity without ease, asking followers to commit rather than consume. While not universally embraced, it fulfills a specific need, offering stability to those who value discipline and clarity in their spiritual lives. A ministry defined by consistency. Over the decades, Jennings has maintained a remarkably consistent approach, resisting shifts in style or message. This consistency has become both his strength and his defining characteristic, shaping a ministry that values endurance over expansion and belief over trend. Rather than chasing relevance, he has focused on preservation, reinforcing the idea that faith, in his view, is not meant to evolve with culture but to stand apart from it. This philosophy has allowed his ministry to retain a clear identity, even as the surrounding landscape continues to change. The legacy still taking shape. Gino Jennings' story is not one of overnight success or widespread acceptance, but of steady development, rooted in early formation and sustained conviction. His journey reflects the influence of upbringing, mentorship, and deliberate choice, illustrating how deeply held beliefs can shape a life's work. Whether admired or debated, his ministry represents a commitment to clarity and discipline, offering insight into how faith traditions are preserved, challenged, and carried forward through generations. His legacy continues to unfold, shaped not by popularity, but by persistence and purpose. Using media as a bridge, not a spotlight. As technology reshaped how messages travel, Gino Jennings' teachings began reaching audiences far beyond physical church walls through radio and television. These platforms widened access, allowing people from different regions to listen without stepping into a congregation. Yet media was never treated as the centerpiece of his ministry. Rather than adjusting his tone or presentation for broader consumption, Jennings maintained the same measured, scripture-centered delivery he used in person. Supporters often point to this consistency as evidence of sincerity, noting that his message did not soften as his audience grew. In this way, media functioned as a bridge rather than a stage, extending reach without redefining purpose. Growth rooted in resonance. As interest in Jennings's teachings expanded, new congregations emerged across major U.S. cities such as New York, Washington, D.C., and Baltimore. Over time, this growth crossed national borders, reaching communities in Canada, the Caribbean, the United Kingdom, and parts of Africa. Rather than being driven by centralized promotion, expansion occurred largely through shared belief and word-of-mouth connection. For followers, this growth was not interpreted as institutional success, but as confirmation that a consistent message could resonate across cultures. The international presence reinforced the idea that shared conviction, rather than geography, formed the foundation of the movement. A voice that demands reflection. Jennings's preaching style is often described as firm and focused, marked by a cadence that encourages careful listening. He speaks with confidence, grounding his message directly in Scripture and returning repeatedly to biblical texts as reference points. Rather than storytelling or emotional appeal, his delivery emphasizes clarity and instruction. Listeners are invited, and sometimes challenged, to examine their own lives through the lens of Scripture. This approach naturally evokes strong reactions, drawing loyalty from those who appreciate directness while prompting disagreements from others who prefer interpretive flexibility. Regardless of response, his style leaves little doubt about where he stands: Scripture as a fixed point. At the center of Jennings's theology is a belief that Scripture serves as a fixed reference rather than a flexible guide. He teaches that the Bible offers enduring instruction, independent of cultural shifts or social trends. From his perspective, faithfulness requires alignment with Scripture rather than adaptation to contemporary norms. This conviction informs every aspect of his teaching, shaping views on personal conduct, worship practices, and community life. Supporters see this approach as grounding and stabilizing, while critics view it as resistant to change. Jennings himself frames it as a commitment to consistency, believing that clarity depends on an unchanging standard. Leadership as responsibility, not status. Jennings approaches church leadership as a role defined by responsibility rather than recognition. Drawing from his interpretation of New Testament writings, he emphasizes order and accountability within the church community. Leadership, in his view, is not about authority for its own sake, but about stewardship and example. These teachings reflect traditional interpretations of roles within the church, presented as theological positions rather than personal preferences. While such views generate debate, Jennings consistently frames them as matters of doctrine rather than judgment, emphasizing that leadership should be exercised with humility and restraint. Conversations around gender and role. One of the more discussed elements of Jennings's teaching involves his views on gender roles within the church. He teaches that men and women are equally valued but hold distinct responsibilities, based on his reading of Scripture. These ideas are presented within a broader emphasis on order and cooperation rather than hierarchy. For supporters, this perspective offers clarity and structure, while critics argue it reflects assumptions shaped by historical context. Jennings maintains that his role is not to redefine Scripture but to interpret it faithfully, leaving individuals to decide how they engage with those teachings. Marriage as a long-term commitment. Jennings speaks often about marriage, framing it as a covenant built on commitment, responsibility, and patience. He emphasizes the seriousness of entering into such a union and encourages thoughtful decision-making rather than impulsive choices. Drawing from biblical teachings, he advocates perseverance and reconciliation, viewing marriage as a long-term partnership rather than a temporary arrangement. These views resonate with individuals concerned about the fragility of modern relationships, though others find the emphasis demanding. Within his broader message, marriage is presented not as a restriction, but as a framework for stability and shared growth. Responsibility and personal choice. Underlying. Many of Jennings's teachings is a focus on personal responsibility and the long-term consequences of decisions. Whether discussing relationships, faith, or daily conduct, he emphasizes intentional living over convenience. Rather than presenting faith as a source of comfort alone, he frames it as a call to discipline and reflection. This approach appeals to those seeking structure and accountability, offering guidance that prioritizes effort over ease. While it does not promise simplicity, it reinforces the idea that meaningful commitments require sustained attention and care. Responding to criticism without reinvention. As Jennings's visibility increased, so did scrutiny. His teachings have been debated, challenged, and analyzed across religious and cultural platforms. Rather than responding with rebranding or softened language, he has largely maintained his original approach. This decision has limited broader acceptance but strengthened loyalty among supporters who value consistency. Jennings appears less concerned with universal agreement than with remaining aligned to his interpretation of Scripture, viewing criticism as an inevitable aspect of public ministry rather than a signal to change direction. A ministry defined by continuity. Over decades of preaching, Jennings has demonstrated a remarkable continuity of message and method. While the means of delivery have evolved, the substance has remained largely unchanged. This continuity has become a defining characteristic of his ministry, distinguishing it from movements shaped by trend or adaptation. For followers, this consistency provides reassurance and identity. For observers, it offers insight into how belief systems persist across time when anchored in deeply held conviction rather than cultural momentum. Influence beyond agreement. Regardless of whether one agrees with his theology, Jennings' influence illustrates the enduring appeal of clarity and conviction in an era often marked by ambiguity. His ministry highlights how firm belief can attract committed followings even amid widespread disagreement. By prioritizing consistency over expansion and interpretation over popularity, he has carved out a distinct space within contemporary religious discourse. His story invites reflection on how faith is taught, transmitted, and preserved, and on the ways individuals seek meaning through structure, discipline, and belief. Modesty and personal conduct. Jennings places significant emphasis on modesty and self-restraint, teaching that outward behavior should reflect inner devotion. He draws from Scripture to advocate simplicity in appearance and lifestyle, viewing restraint as a form of reverence. These teachings have been among the most controversial, particularly in a culture that values personal expression and autonomy. Jennings presents them as spiritual disciplines rather than restrictions, emphasizing intention over appearance. Nonetheless, they remain a source of ongoing debate, public criticism, and debate. As Jennings' profile grew, so did scrutiny. His sermons have been critiqued by other religious leaders, commentators, and media outlets, often focusing on his most uncompromising statements. Public debates and confrontations have become part of his story, reinforcing his image as a polarizing figure. Jennings has responded consistently, relying on Scripture to defend his positions and rejecting accusations of intolerance or extremism. For him, disagreement is expected when conviction challenges comfort. A legacy still unfolding. Gino Jennings' impact cannot be measured solely by agreement or disagreement with his views. His ministry has influenced thousands, shaping communities built around shared doctrine and discipline. Whether regarded as a defender of tradition or a controversial figure, his role in modern religious discourse is undeniable. His legacy continues to develop, defined by unwavering conviction, organizational growth, and a commitment to preaching what he believes to be timeless truth. What his story represents. Ultimately, Jennings' story reflects a broader question faced by faith communities today: how to remain rooted in belief while navigating a changing world. His life and ministry illustrate the challenges of standing firm in conviction amid cultural transformation. For supporters, he represents courage and clarity. For critics, rigidity and resistance. Yet regardless of perspective, his influence highlights the enduring tension between tradition and adaptation, reminding us that faith, when lived seriously, will always provoke strong responses.